Good evening, everyone. I am the Marginal Non-Hermit, and today I have a little thing for you that I call rehabilitating competition. And what I mean by that is rehabilitating the term competition. It gets thrown around a lot by people who misuse it, or maybe misuse is a strong word, people who use it in confusing ways, where they bring together non-aggressive and aggressive versions of competition and call them all the same thing. It's an issue because the word competition, and as we'll get to a little later, the word or phrase perfect competition, are economic terms that have a specific meaning in free market economics that is different from the colloquial English usage of the term. There are things that you can do that you would call competition in plain English that aren't competition in the technical economic sense. And because of this, a lot of people who are against the free market will attack the idea of competition in a variety of ways, some of which I'll try to cover here, by conflating, that's the word I was looking for, conflating aggressive competition with non-aggressive competition. So, with that said, let's get started. In plain English, competition implies that there will be one winner or a small group of winners and everyone else is a loser. That's not how it works in free market economics. It is, in fact, perfectly possible for multiple groups to compete with each other and there never to be a set winner or set loser. You have to remember that in a free market, all you have are voluntary exchanges, and those voluntary exchanges are always win-win. As long as no one is being forced to participate in the exchange, both parties must therefore believe that they are winning or at least gaining in the trade. Of course, there are cases of incomplete information where a person thinks that they value certain things a certain way, and later on realize that that valuation was incorrect. That doesn't invalidate the previously agreed to exchange unless some kind of contractual setup was produced to complete that. Once the ownership changes hands, and that's why it's important to get good information before you exchange things that might have a well-established market value or might have an unknown to you value. Multiple firms can compete even if the goods that they're producing are non-differentiated. So imagine crude oil, just plain crude oil. You can have multiple companies that are producing and selling crude oil, and neither of them necessarily has to come out the winner, and neither of them necessarily has to come out the loser in this competition. In fact, what competition between them does is actually an incredibly positive thing. Aggressive competition, where Company A shoots missiles at Company B's property and Company B shoots guns at Company A's properties, that's not a free market institution. That's not a free market phenomenon. So we can safely condemn that. But what having multiple firms competing in the same undifferentiated good can do is it can encourage the different firms to attempt different cost-saving methods. And what happens over time is that the cost-saving methods that actually work and work well get adopted by more and more of the firms as they see other firms using them, and methods that don't work fall to the wayside. And this is helpful. It's helpful to have multiple firms doing this because sometimes these methods are in conflict with each other, and sometimes you can have a lot of sunk costs from choosing an incorrect method. And therefore, we would like those sunk costs to be a fraction of a small firm rather than a fraction of the entire industry, a similar fraction of the entire industry, assuming that's the trade-off, right? That is to say, I'd rather lose 10% of Exxon than 10% of all oil altogether. So firms that are competing in undifferentiated goods can compete in price by changing the way that they produce said goods, the path that they take to producing such goods. This also helps in the case that some product has a higher demand than any individual or small, already associated group of capitalists can afford to produce. So imagine that people want $100 billion of oil a day. There would need to be, if there was no competition, there would need to be a single person who is willing to put that much of his or her wealth at stake for that purpose. And if there wasn't, then you would have issues with lack of supply, shortages and such. But instead, if 100 different people can each put in $1 billion a day into this, endeavor, or 1 million people can put $1,000 a day each into this endeavor, then it becomes much more manageable for a spread out capital system to accommodate new desires of the public. Now, if the product is differentiated, this can get even better. In addition to the effects of different groups trying different cost-saving techniques for production, different groups can produce slightly different versions of the same good with branding. And, for instance, there will be people who prefer one brand to the other and people who prefer the other brand simply because of personal tastes. This creates a larger variety of goods for people to enjoy and for people to maximize their enjoyment. For instance, a person might choose to buy almost exclusively Coke products, and another might choose to buy almost exclusively Pepsi products. If you look at the nutritional facts on the back of a can of Coke versus a can of Pepsi, they're very similar, almost indistinguishable. But people who like one and dislike the other, or like the other less, are better served if they can choose which of the two choices or multiple choices they can get. There's also Tab and Royal Crown and all kinds of other types of cola. In addition to this, different firms can choose to employ different methods of advertising, try new things, try different things. There's other places where they can compete in a differentiated good that they couldn't compete in an undifferentiated good. It doesn't really matter how you advertise crude oil. People are going to want crude oil, but Pepsi can choose to advertise on television, and Coke can choose to advertise on the internet, and they can both see which of those methods works better for them. And it might not even be true that if internet advertising works for Coke, it works for Pepsi. It might be that the people who drink Pepsi prefer to watch television and prefer to consume ads on television. There's all kinds of little things that can happen here, but all of them point in the direction of better serving the consumer. And that's really the key of competition. Competition is how we take unknowns in the world of capital investment and translate them to better satisfaction for consumers. But for differentiated goods, here's even the better thing that happens: specialization. Specialization is the root of a great deal of our prosperity. The fact that I can sit down and produce, physics experiments and internet videos and make a living, and I don't ever have to produce my own shoes, means that I can focus on doing better in doing science experiments, and, I can try to focus better on doing internet videos, though I'm probably not very good at that. In any case, specialization leads to a higher diversity of goods and a diversity of specific goods as well. To give you an example, you might have a company like Nike that focuses on athletic shoes, and you might have another company, I don't know the name of a hiking shoe company, but you might have a company like Ozark Trail. There's one that's like a budget hiking shoe company, right? You might have a company that focuses on one particular use of a type of good. So, I'm talking about the difference between, basketball use sneakers and hiking use shoes or boots. And they can further specialize in producing that specific type of differentiated good. Now, this means that now, instead of having maybe, say 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of good shoe, now we have 20, 25. And even those stupid socialists say that having this many different types of goods is a waste of resources. What's actually happening, if these companies are all independently profitable, which they certainly can be, is that they are serving different consumers with different needs more efficiently than a single firm would be likely to do. As I said before, competition is only a problem when aggression gets involved. The issue with aggression, of course, is that when a an exchange of sorts is done where only one side of the exchange approves of the act, that makes winners and losers by definition. And so when we, in plain English, include aggressive competition, or you might call it cutthroat competition, or something like that, where aggressive means are used to compete between firms, now we're not talking about free market phenomena, and now we're talking about things where serious problems can actually happen. Now, earlier I mentioned the phrase perfect competition, which is another one that gets that causes a lot of problems because of the colloquial English meaning of the word perfect. Now, the colloquial English meaning of the word perfect can be seen as something along the lines of correct or morally righteous, when in fact the term perfect competition has no such moralistic ideas behind it. Perfect competition is a simple economic term that describes, and perfect in the sense used in economics, is a term that describes when a system most closely matches the model that economists use to describe it. So what perfect competition means is that all of the firms are small enough that no single firm can make a large change in the landscape of exchange for a specific good or type of good. And what this does is it prevents a certain firm from basically playing around with supply and demand in specific ways that make it more difficult for competitors to make up the shortfall. So perfect competition in an economic sense is completely value-free. It merely means that the model that we choose to aggregate and simplify what we call competition in economics, that if the market obeys these certain requirements or criteria, that the market will more closely or perfectly match the behavior of the model. This is a limitation of the model, not of the firms themselves. Because what happens is that the model aggregates everything and glosses over a lot of differences, turns complex discrete issues into continuous function-like lines, things like that. Because of that, there are people who will say that in order for the market to do good, there must be complete information among all parties. And this is true for what is called perfect competition. But it is not true that if one person is ignorant in a market, that necessarily they will somehow this is morally a moral failing of the market or something like that. It's possible, certainly, that a person who walks around ignorantly will make exchanges that he later regrets. But again, that's not a problem with the market. That's a problem with a person choosing to make exchanges with extremely limited information. And to some degree, everyone has some amount of limited information. This is not a moral or correctness failing of the market. This is how real-world competition deviates from the model that economists use to describe competition. So, with that, I hope I've kind of given a little bit of effort toward making people understand, or helping people understand, why competition in an economic sense is a little bit different from what you might call competition in plain English, and why these differences are important. That's why I called this talk Rehabilitating Competition, because what I'm trying to do is make it so that competition is not a bad word among as many people as possible. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching and listening. I hope this was a little bit interesting and a little bit enlightening, perhaps. If you have some thoughts or something, drop a comment, or, otherwise, thank you for watching. See y'all later.